Hello, everybody. Welcome to Holy Foley. I'm Dr. Vanessa Thimament. And today, my guest is Sara Pinheiro, who is from Portugal, but who is in Prague now. Sara is a sound performance scholar, and this is really exciting stuff because it's a whole new way of looking at Foley. We're going to be discussing, among other things, Acousmatic Foley, which a lot of you may not be familiar with, but it's really kind of an exciting thing to talk about. So welcome, Sara. I am so excited to talk to you. I read an article that you wrote that was in an academic journal. I read academic journals, people, and there's a lot of good stuff there. Sara is in Prague, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how she got there from Portugal, and she has been in Sweden and done several things. So, Sara, before we start talking about musique concrète and acousmatic Foley and other things that you do, I'd like to know how you started in Portugal and you went to Sweden and you were in Prague and how you're in Prague now and what you're doing. So let's start there.
So hello everyone, I'm Vanessa. Thank you for inviting me. I'm beyond, I still have a little bit of a hard time adjusting to the idea. I'm very glad and grateful to have the chance to talk to you. And so basically I'm from a small pescatorian village in Portugal, and at some point, in a bit of a odd way, I ended up going to film school, which is a film school mostly practice-oriented, I would say, or at least when I studied there, it was like this. And the school, the way the Portuguese film school works is that you go to study film in general. So in the first year, you have a little bit of everything. You learn about camera, production, screenwriting. You learn about all the segments of making a film. And then as you progress in your studies, you start choosing what you want to specialize on. And I specialized in sound, wanting to be, which was not my plan at all, but the first time that I did sound for a movie in school, like you just put the headphones on, you turn the microphone on, and it's like, oh, what's this? And, it was kind of like love at first hear or something, So I decided to continue with sound, and I finished my bachelor with an exchange with the Prague Film School as well. I came to Czech Republic as an exchange student. Then I finished my bachelor in Portugal, and I had the chance to take an internship in Sweden. Then I continued studying. I took a MA in Sonology, which is basically a course on electroacoustic music or acousmatic music, electronic music. You have, especially in the master program, you kind of have a certain level of freedom concerning the kind of music that you specialize on. And at that time, now it might seem a little bit odd, and you did mention that in one of your episodes, because back then there were actually not so many sound programs to study. Mm-hmm. So actually, I'm talking about this is 2010, and in Europe, which is where I wanted to stay, there were not many programs where I could develop my thinking and my aesthetics regarding sound without being a musician. So I would have to go learn an instrument, or without being purely technical, becoming, a sound engineer. And I wanted something in between, because I think it's important to know how to do things technically and to use the tools that you have around them. But I also wanted to develop my critical position over sound, or, I knew that I wanted to work with sound in a way that was not so restricted to the image. By the time that you finish the bachelor and you had to we were doing a film every semester, so that's 2 films per academic year. And I was a bit tired, not tired, but, the fact that as a sound designer, we had to follow the image and we had to serve the image, especially when I thought that that's how it had to be. So I went to studying sonology, and I could finally do some sort of sound compositions. Let's say at that time I was calling them sound stories. I wanted to make film without the image. So I wanted to use exactly the same process that I was using to work for films, or to work in films, but without the image. So I could decide my own tempos, I could decide the length of the sounds, I could decide the things that usually the image doesn't let us decide. And I was very lucky to have that chance in Sonology at that time. So again, this is around 2010. There were not many courses, for instance, there were not so many courses on sound art, or, you know, uh, field recordings, although it's a very long practice, was not well implemented with electroacoustic music, so to say. And I went to Sonology basically wanting to do field recordings, always combined with my understanding of Foley, because the way I worked on my compositions in Sonology was very similar to film, as in I went to a given location, recording the ambiences, the atmospheres, and trying to capture the sounds that I could, but then I would grab a few objects and record them in a booth, without the image, of course, because it was acousmatic. But, for the details, for the close-up, for the textures that maybe in a central station, let's say in a train station, you have other things interfering, right? So you capture the general sound of the train station, and then you can go to studio and bring small things to add to that ambience, to add the detail.
What kind of small things, for example?
I'm thinking in particular, my first composition in Sonology was a composition with sewing machines. And I went to this shop, which even that was something that I took from film school. Because in film school, at least in my film school, they kept teaching us to start from a place that we know ourselves. Start from within, if you want to put it that way. So when I am in the Netherlands and I'm trying to decide, okay, what's going to be my first ever composition, I decided for sewing machines because I knew it very well. My aunt is a tailor. She's 87 now. Like all my life, I had the sound of a sewing machine around. She used to make my clothes and all these things, and so I went for that because it was an environment that I knew. And I spent a few days in a shop in The Hague, recording these ladies working. It was, like a regular shop. And I had all the machines and I had some details. But of course, once in a while, you have a customer coming in and talking, right? So I always edit that out. I have a tendency to erase humans from my compositions. And then after having like the main sounds that I wanted to use for the composition, I go to the studio with a bunch of buttons and scissors and needles and, threads and all that. And I make the small sounds myself in the studio. I made the small sounds myself, and I added to the field recording of the sewing machines and the workers, right? So when you listen, just like in film, when you listen, you cannot say what was recorded inside and what was added, hopefully. But I had this approach. For me was very natural because that's how we learned in film, no? You make the film, but then you have to add these other things. So the process was by all means analog to what I had learned in film school. And where were we? Sorry, how did I end up in Prague? So I lived in the Netherlands for 3 years. The master, the 2 years that I was studying in the master program were absolutely amazing for me. I had the chance to learn and play with these ideas around sound. I stayed connected to the school, but the Netherlands as a country doesn't have a very strong audiovisual production economy, or environment. And I knew Prague already, and I knew that Czech Republic has a good tradition in filmmaking, both because of their own production, but also because there is a lot of international productions taking place here in the country. So I decided to come here just to try, to see if I could have working sound, because, well, unfortunately, I didn't consider at the time to try in Portugal, because I also thought that Portugal didn't have a very strong production scene. And like, I mean, for the image, you can employ a certain amount of people, and for sound, it's even less people. That's right. The teams are even smaller, so the chances are even smaller as well. So I decided to come to Prague to see if I would. I knew there were many sound studios, and I knew some. I had this image of the country as a strong film production country. So I came. I went to do an internship in the film school because basically, sorry, this is not going to be very easy to follow, but basically when I finished my master's, Kees Tazelaar, the director of the Institute of Sonology, he invited me to create a class, a lecture, a program that would kind of cross these two worlds of, let's say, sound design for film and concrete music. And he's very interested in film as well, and he thought that Sonology should have some film content, some film program, but he wanted someone that kind of had my perspective, this, bringing in the tradition of concrete music to film, and this relationship with sound props and with sound objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right after I finished the masters, I started teaching in Sonology, which was I don't know how that happened. Don't tell anyone. No, I'm kidding. But it was a great opportunity. I never even considered to be a teacher, but
Right.
but it happened, right?
Yeah.
And when I came to Prague,
I tell you, I think when we teach, we learn more about what it is we're trying to understand than if we never taught. I think,
absolutely.
don't you find that's true? That when we teach others, we realize what it is we have to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And and on top of that, I would never have come to the formulation Acousmatic Foley if it wasn't for this workshop that I give in Sonology now for more than 10 years.
Let's stop at a point and actually give your definition, which after reading what you've written is exactly in alignment, because we've read a lot of the same academic literature et al. For PhD work, which are, certain books, that we've all read. I mean, we've all read Altman, and Rick Altman was my mentor and why I even got into getting a PhD. Thank you, Rick, and Michel Chion and various others. But let's define acousmatic to begin with, so that people, and acousmatic, so that people understand the difference between Michel's, Chion's definitions that we're applying here, so that people can understand what these ideas are, so that they can start really being with us on this journey.
Okay, so the idea of acousmatic is mode of listening, is a way to listen to sounds, to relate to sounds, that implies more or less two premises. One is that we don't see the source of the sound, so there's no visual relationship with this moment of listening. And two, that we also don't take into account or rationalize the source of the sound. So it's not just that you don't see the source, it's also the understanding of the source should play a minimal role in the experience. And this comes from a tradition of concrete music popularized or usually attributed to Pierre Schaeffer as a pioneer, and his understanding of reduced listening and his relationship with what now in English has been translated as the sonorous object. So this idea of the sonorous object or the reduced listening mode is basically saying if you listen to a sound on a loop or often enough or attentive enough, you will bypass this immediate human reaction, which is most of the times asking, what is this? And instead, you'll hear the textures, the patterns, the gesture, the tone, the acoustic information, the space information. You'll hear all the sonic properties of that sound, regardless of where the sound comes from or what the sound means.
Now, I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to add in a more practical application of this for people who are not into the more theoretical and academic perspectives of what this is all about. And I'm going to do a fork of the road here and go both ways here. So, because my whole purpose of being in the world of what I do for sound is to bridge the practical practitioner's world and the academic theoretical world, since I like to do both. So in the theoretical world of musique concrète, reduced listening, and acousmatic sound, what we're talking about is acousmatic sound is not as having the sound be its own thing on its own without having it be attached to a visual symbol. Musique concrète is the items as they are in nature without and letting them become what they are. They can be something different. And reduced sound is taking the sound and taking all of the attachment that we've taken to it and keep listening and letting it get down to its very salient, organic, most reduced piece of what it is. Now, in music, for example, as a singer, when I'm listening to a singer, I'm not just taking in the full body of that singer's performance. I'm going to reduce my listening and listen to what the timbre is, what the high-pitched tones are, what the partials are, what the purity of it is. I'm going to be listening to a lot of reduced listening to that. And an orchestrational person will be doing it with the violin or the oboe or whatever. As a Foley artist, what I'm doing with reduced listening as I do it in performance, because I do it to image. I do it to image because I am a movie and film. I'm a film and TV, but mostly film person. I am reducing the sound to say, what component is this sound adding to this film? I'm not seeing my deadbolt as a deadbolt. And I'm seeing it as what component of the sound, and I close my eyes, what component of the sound is this adding to this part of the sound I want to make for this film? And that's also a component of reduced listening. Now, what's interesting about this in the practice of Foley, all of you Foley people and sound people out there that work with movies or image in the practical world, is one very big mistake that people will make is they'll look at an object and add into it all of the information of what it is and what it sounds like in their real world. And what Sara's talking about is removing all of that, removing all of the symbols we've put to it, all of the sounds we've associated with it, all of the assumptions we've made to that sound that we've conditioned ourselves to hear. And what we will do in the real world of making a film is we'll say, oh, well, that's a deadbolt. It's going to sound like a deadbolt. It's not going to work for this. And I laugh and I say, it's just a component of sound. Well, we need to start over fresh and see what it brings to this. And Sarah was talking about this in a very, very specific way. And I'm going to let you take over the conversation here, because this is where it works in a very academic and theoretical way. And it also works in the real world of, I want to make sounds for a movie, and you're telling me it will not work because it looks like this.
One of the first things that triggered my idea of acousmatic Foley, basically putting these two words which apparently contradict themselves, is idea that a Foley artist is actually an acousmatic listener. Because when you go look for an object in your Foley shelves, you're looking for what is going to sound like and not what it is. Of course, after years of practice and after being trained for what you're doing, you look at it and you know how it will sound like. But your interest and your criteria is the sound. So, the first idea is that a Foley artist is an acousmatic listener. The second thing, because this idea of bridging a little bit more practice and academic research, or theory with practice, is something that motivated me in the beginning as well. In my the smallest, I'm no one to contribute to nothing, but this idea of and you mentioned that a lot in your episodes, like the importance of being trained by someone that has already a legacy and has like a background and luggage enough to pass on the craft. What I felt in the very beginning, and I feel that now as being on the other side, being a teacher, but when someone asks you something, or you ask someone something, and the answer is, "Oh, it depends. Oh, I don't know." Like this feeling that the practitioners were not. And this might sound very bad, but I mean it well. But like that they didn't. I was yet to meet practitioners that could actually articulate in theory what they were doing, could explain. Of course, you can grab a prop and show me how you operate it, but the thinking process and the implications of that in the process itself. So I too wanted to bridge a little bit more academic research with practice, and I ended up being, in both. I do sound design, I do academic research. And the other thing that I wanted to bridge was, by the end of my master's, I was absolutely divided. I would either be in a film set, holding the boom, doing sound for a film, then later the post-production for the same film, and all that context, or I would be in a concert for loudspeakers with people that sit down, close their eyes, and stay like that the whole concert. But so many times in the conversations in one or the other environment, I wanted to cross the conversations. I wanted to say, in a film conference, I wanted to say, well, excuse me, but the French were already doing that since the 50s. Or in a concrete music environment or electroacoustic music environment, I was like, excuse me, but some people in film do that since the 30s. Like for me, there were many common things in these two different worlds of mine, different contexts of mine, which I didn't think they were that different.
So, it's interesting that you say this. It's interesting that you say this, Sara, because I think this is a really important point that needs to be unpacked a little bit. There are two things that I would say about this. The first thing I would say is a lot of the people that are practitioners of Foley are intuitive or creative and are practicing it and doing it, but they don't analyze it and they don't really think through or articulate very well what it is they're doing, and they're not really critical thinking about it. And the other part that I would say about it is, in the academic world, they critically think about it, but they really wouldn't know how to be able to just go into a room and do it. And that's what I found. And one of the things that you're expressing is always been kind of my frustration, which is always being able to do both and wanting to do both and wanting to discuss it both ways can be very frustrating for people who don't want to. And there's something that goes on in Hollywood that there's with a lot of the people where they honestly do think that the Hollywood way is kind of the way. And one of the things that I discovered is that, and you know this because you're a European, there are so many different ways of approaching any sort of creative project. And what with talking to people from all over the world, they've been approaching any sort of sound creativity from very different ways, depending on what their culture is or what their background is or what their history is. And when you say, well, France has been doing this for a while, or England's been doing this for a while, or, I would like at some point to talk to Nigeria about their films because they've made tons of films. And I have talked to some people in India and, they've been doing it a very long time and they have a very specific way of doing it. It is really interesting to challenge our own precepts about how the craft is done when you find out that France during the silent era had something going on that when they entered into sound, they'd already had some ideas of how to do it that we were completely unaware of here in the United States when we thought we were all that in a bag of chips. So what you're expressing to me is what got me interested into delving into the academic world was there's more than this. I'm curious. So it's the curiosity that I find so attractive. Mm-hmm. It's the curiosity of what else, what's beyond, what's more, what's different. And that's what's led me to this whole idea of doing any of the writing I do or talking to the people I talk to or doing now this podcast. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And you're young. So now you'll find as you get older, it's a little easier for people to even want to listen to you because I'm on the other side being older. But when you're young and you're a young woman, it's amazing how it's hard for people to even understand how you can be taken seriously, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you because you have already done quite a bit of research and exploration. And, 10 years from now, when you look back on what you're doing now, it's not going to seem like you did much because you will have done so much more, but you're already doing quite a bit.
I want to, first of all, I think because, since you contacted me, I've been like mad reading the third edition of Holy Grail because I had read only the second one. And I find it very beautiful to see how you are adapting it and you are, opening the horizons a little bit more or including more people, including, all the same information can be plastic and can be adjusted to not have one specific narrative about it. And I find that I think for all of us it's a process regarding how inclusive we can be. So what you're saying is something that I think about a lot, our geographical limitations. And when I say limitations, I mean thinking that, everything happened in your neighborhood without realizing there's so many neighborhoods around, So I find it very beautiful to see that, if I dare comparing like that, we both have been doing that journey of trying to be more inclusive.
It's exciting to me to talk to people doing this. There are quite a few.
Yes. I don't know if it's because, certainly being a woman plays a role, and it played a role in how, for instance, I will get much more easily invited to give a lecture than to actually perform a noise concert, right? Or to, when I came to Czech Republic, I was trained as a front of house. I could do front of house for theater, for concerts, um, and that kind of disappeared because you're not looked at as a possibility for a technical job, and that's because of this. That's a prejudice. That's looking at me and judging my intellectual or technical capacities based on what's on the outside. Um, but you know, I and for instance, you know, I mentioned it in the article that you read. I mentioned this fact that the idea of a boom pole was actually was actually invented by a woman, or it was thought of by a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would have made a whole difference if I was told that in school when I was 18 years old. Because what I've been told at the early age was actually that I didn't belong there, that that job was not for me. That job was not for someone skinny like me, someone short like me, someone female like me, right? And when I found that, and I found it embarrassingly late in my education, I found this story about the boom pole less than 10 years ago. One day I decided I was going to research about pioneers of electronic music and sound art, exactly for the same reason. I was tired of being told that women didn't do anything or that they were not there. So, you know, first I judged myself. I was like, hold on, but I also don't know so many, right? So first I wanted to find out for myself so I could have this information, you know, which is funny because today I'm actually wearing the t-shirt with their names, but that's a different story. Sorry. Anyway, in the process of doing that research, I found out about the boom pole and I was mad because I was like, hold on, for so many years, you know, so many years I was, you know, I had this feeling that I didn't belong somewhere. And it would, I think, I'm absolutely convinced it would have made difference if I was told when I was learning film history.
When I was at Ball State, which I was there for 5 years, and that's in Indiana, which is not the most progressive state, but has a wonderful school called Ball State University. And I was the endowed chair for 5 years, the first woman in telecommunications to be the endowed chair. And I had several classes where I taught actually a production class, and we did some documentaries. And I needed a student to lead the students and teach the students how to do the production sound. I wanted a student to do it because it wasn't my expertise to teach production sound. I'm post-production. The student that was recommended to me to teach the other students in the class how to do the production sound when we went out, what we did was we did documentaries on local, each time I did a documentary on a local choir and promoted the choir. And one of them, they're in various towns, but they were professional and semi-professional choirs that we did documentaries about them. And the person recommended to me is 4'10" and weighs about 90 pounds. And she's brilliant. And she came in, and her name is Ivy. And she came in and taught all of these people, mostly men, but a couple of women, how to do production sound with the pole and how to do the microphones and how to handle it and how to keep track of it. And I loved it. I thought this was the one recommended to me by the production sound teacher there. Oh, you've got to have Ivy. She's the best. She's the best we've ever had teaching she's the best student we've ever had in years in production sound. And I thought, the school is very much not overly gendered that way. It really is fair. I mean, the department is extremely fair that way. And it was really wonderful that, there was a woman endowed chair because the department was so progressive in wanting to do that. And then there was a young woman teaching production sound. And I know what you mean, but there's motion, there's movement in this.
There is.
And there's
I'm not sure if
and the following year, I actually made got a grant and made a documentary about American women in American film sound, and she was in this class, and she was the main person running the production sound. And we went to New York and LA, and we did interviews, conversations with women in sound. And they were there was a whole group of production sound mixers in New York and LA that we talked with. And they talked about their experiences being women in production sound, either boom operators or mixers, and what their experiences were. Some good, some bad, some wonderful. And New York was really amazing. There are several women in New York that had amazing experiences. New York is a much smaller community where everybody knows each other very, very well. And it is really interesting to hear the stories of women, but I think the United States does a lot of work towards equality that way. So this marginalizing women in these roles changes a lot. And I heard their stories about what was changing it and who was changing it and the generational changes. But it is humorous to hear that it's a woman that comes up with the idea of the pole for the boom, but it doesn't surprise me because we're smaller and they would figure out. But also, you know, the very first editors that are putting together a picture are women. And because they were considered good at sewing, but they're, you know, and I had two aunts because my grandfather was in the film industry from the silent days, and he had two sisters or three sisters that were editors, and because he was in RKO and they were in Culver City, so in the Culver City part of it, and he was at RKO for a while when Kennedy was the head of RKO. And they were picture editors before it became a bigger job and went to the men. And then they became, I guess, became assistants or something. I don't know, but or maybe they stayed in the industry, but they're gone now, so I can't ask them exactly what they did.
Sorry.
Yeah, but it's interesting that women were pioneering a lot of these things, and we forget that.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing with Foley. Luckily, you know, people in charge thought that Foley was a good job for women because women are so handy.
Coordinated and answers.
You know, which by the way was something that also played a lot, a big role in my self-doubt, because I was neither a musician or a dancer, or I didn't have this background that you often hear people evoking when they tell the story of how they landed in sound. And in my case, I was always surrounded by sound people that were either musicians or very much into music, and I wasn't. I didn't play an instrument. I knew music, of course, but you know, it was not. And I always thought, in the beginning, I always thought that I needed to become a musician to be a sound designer. And later on in Sonology, I often got trapped into discussions about music or sound. Are my compositions music or are my compositions sound? And what I find, what makes me uncomfortable about that is that the moment that you call it music, you denying the possibility for sound to just be sound.
Right.
Or you denying the fact that it can be, you know, once you put the tag, the stamp, this is music, you don't leave open the possibilities for it to be many other things. So right. At some point I became comfortable with saying music might be one of the consequences of what I do, but not the only one. Right. So when I perform, when I play my own compositions, some are more musical than others, but I'm hoping there are other layers in this experience that are not necessarily reduced to the idea of music, of you know, a beat to tap your feet to.